We begin this hour with more on the U.S. decision to drop the so-called mother of all bombs on ISIS yesterday. The weapon was used to strike a cave in the eastern part of Afghanistan. At least 36 militants were killed, according to Afghan officials. It had nearly 22,000 pounds of explosives. The U.S. commander in Afghanistan, General John Nicholson, was given full authority to drop the bomb. Earlier today, he explained why he decided to use it.
The enemy used these tunnels and minefields to move around the battlefield and protect themselves from the attacks from Afghan and U.S. forces. This was the right weapon against the right target. Daesh has sent suicide bombers to attack peaceful demonstrations and have killed and wounded hundreds of innocent civilians. And just last month, they shot and stabbed hospital patients lying in their beds. They are animals.
For more on the strike, we turn to Micah O'Hanlon. He's a senior fellow of foreign policy at the Brookings Institute, as well as the co-director for the Brookings Center for 21st Century Security and Intelligence. Michael, good to see you.
Nice to be with you. Thanks.
So how much damage does a strike like this do to ISIS?
Well, ISIS doesn't have that big of a presence in Afghanistan. As you know, our main enemy there has been the Taliban, and then some groups that are affiliated with the Taliban, such as the so-called Haqqani Network, with its bases largely in the Pakistani tribal areas. So, it's possible that this actually got at a substantial fraction of the ISIS presence. Probably not. It's probably a modest fraction. But, if ISIS only has a few hundred people in Afghanistan and we manage to take 36 off the battlefield, and if it's the right 36, could be a substantial blow. I think the more interesting question for me is, why was this particular target interesting for this particular bomb? And I think when you're talking about a tunnel complex, you may not be able to see where the tunnels go easily from any kind of sensor. So if you were to drop several 2,000-pound bombs at, the sort of the standard type, at the entrance that you know about, it may not penetrate far enough in with the blast wave. And if you use this big weapon, if you only know one entrance point in, there's going to be a lethal pressure that reaches deeper into the tunnel complex. So I think that's why it was used.
And it's interesting. Obviously, the Trump administration is facing a lot of foreign policy flares right now: North Korea, Syria, Russia. Talk about the psychological impact that a bomb like this has.
I don't know. This kind of bomb, as I say, is useful for very specific tactical circumstances. The fact that it's 11 tons instead of 1 ton, normally we would just go ahead and drop 11 one-ton bombs and be more precise. But if you only can get at a given area with one aim point, as I was mentioning, then maybe the 11-ton has a certain advantage. My point is that most North Korean targets are not going to be of that character. They're going to be either deeper underground, in which case even the Moab wouldn't get at them. You'd have to consider using a nuclear weapon. Or they're going to be the kind of targets where you just as soon use several smaller bombs rather than one big one. And you'd be more effective, more precise, and less in the way of civilian casualties. I don't therefore think that North Korea is going to see this as a big analogous situation that could be extended to them. With one possible exception, they're still trying to size up Donald Trump. And I think Donald Trump is gladly playing into a little bit of this sort of madman theory of international relations. If he seems somewhat unpredictable, that may put a little bit of the fear of God into the North Koreans. And you combine that with some Chinese economic pressure, and maybe you can dissuade the North Koreans from the nuclear test. But the actual military threat in and of itself, I don't think is all that substantial.
Right. So I guess my question I was sort of driving at was the Trump administration trying to send a message here. Clearly, you're talking about the tactical implications here, but beyond that, I mean, other than being able to kill those 36 fighters and perhaps flattening one of their cave networks, the psychological message to some of those folks who may be flaring up right now is not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You can always hope that there's a big psychological impact. And I wouldn't be against that. I would be very happy if we could persuade the North Koreans not to do this 6th nuclear test, and otherwise to re-engage with diplomacy on at least capping their nuclear arsenal for now and someday hopefully getting rid of it. But what I'm trying to say is the use of a Moab, the use of 59 cruise missiles against Syria, This, to me, does not represent such a dramatic escalation in American military power or its application that one should necessarily conclude Donald Trump is a lot more, willing to use force than his predecessors. I do not come to that conclusion myself. Now, if the North Koreans come to a different conclusion, all the better. And my guess is that Donald Trump would welcome them coming to that sort of conclusion. But it's very hard to think of how we use a limited amount of military force against North Korea in a productive way without running an excessive risk of escalation.
Fascinating insight from Michael Hanlon at the Brookings Institution. Michael, thank you so much as always.
My pleasure.